My name is Jake Gerges. I'm the Executive Director of Wisconsin Literacy, and I'm here to welcome you to the Fall 2025 Virtual Conference. Um, what struck me when I was looking at the topics that were covered this year is it really comes down to how learning connects us all, how it builds understanding and strengthens communities, and how it creates opportunities for everyone. But I think what stood out more to me than anything else this year was that every session that will cover this today was requested by one of our members. The topics that we're talking about today reflect what challenges you face and where you see the greatest potential for growth. Given that it's our 40th anniversary, I do want to kind of recap that 40 years ago, a group of adult educators in Wisconsin came together with the goal to share best practices and speak with one unified voice about the needs of our communities across the state. That group later on became Wisconsin Literacy, and we look at it as a place where people gather and learn, grow together, and share. Our conference sessions remind us that education is more than instruction, it's about relationships. In every classroom, every board meeting, and every conversation, what we're really teaching one thing is how people connect with information, with opportunity, and with each other. Oftentimes, when people hear literacy, they often picture a really quiet classroom. And I can tell you from experience, we are anything but quiet in the work that we do. Oftentimes, it's about parents talking confidently with a teacher, or it's about adults gaining confidence online. It's also about the leaders sharing stories that move communities to action. But one thing I can tell you right now is it's never quiet. In the last 20 years, I've seen literacy work evolve from chalkboards to smartphones. But one thing I can tell you is that has never changed is we always collaborate, we share, and we always grow when we come together. To get a little philosophical on you, but not get too long, because Jamie told me I had very limited time because it's her session. The founding fathers believed in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And recently, historians wanted to remind us that for the founding fathers, the pursuit of happiness meant lifelong learning, the freedom to grow beyond your starting point. That same belief drives us today. We strive every day to make sure that everyone has the chance to learn, grow, and move forward. At Wisconsin Literacy, we'll continue to find and share best practices. We'll keep adapting them to fit the unique needs of every organization and every community, and we'll advocate where our voices matter the most and are heard. And we'll always remain the organization that's made up of and designed for the organizations doing the work that change their community. So before we move forward, I want to thank every member of Wisconsin Literacy. I want to also make a promise. We'll never stop advocating, we'll never stop learning, and we'll never stop being the organization that we were founded to be. Thank you. Take it away, Jamie.
Thank you so much, Jake. I am going to share my screen. In just a moment, you should be able to see my slides. Please let us know in the chat if you are having any tech issues and you don't see the slides. And before we get started, I just a few housekeeping things. This session is being recorded, so both the recording and the slides will be available to the public on our website, probably late next week, maybe early next week if we're lucky. We're going to request that you stay muted to eliminate some background noise. If you do have questions or comments, please feel free to put those in the chat. And our colleague Shannon is monitoring the chat today, so she's going to help us pay attention to that. This is Teaching Media Literacy, empowering adults to critically analyze information. My name is Jamie Cobes. I am a manager of tutor training and digital literacy here at Wisconsin Literacy. And prior to my position here, I was actually a high school teacher for 15 years. And I had the privilege of teaching media literacy strategies in a class called Real World Reading to seniors in high school. Marcia.
Good morning. I'm Marcia Connett. I'm the Southeast Regional Consultant for Wisconsin Literacy. And for about 12 years, I was an instructor with the technical college system, teaching at both MATC and Gateway Tech. And I taught media literacy, even though I didn't know that's what it was, because every morning I would start off my class with students bringing in news information. And it it became apparent very early on that some of their news sources were not necessarily the most reliable. And we didn't have a name for it back then, media literacy, but it was something that became very important in what I was teaching and what I was helping them understand about the information that they were getting. So if you look at the cartoon that we have here, this very much represents what a lot of us think about. You know, what do you mean all my facts are wrong? I would hear that quite often from my students. I copied everything straight off the internet. And of course, we know that everything that's on the internet is accurate, right? And so it's important to remember that even though our students, our learners, tend to be quite savvy, probably on their phones and maybe on computers, a lot of the information that they see out there is very difficult for them to determine whether it's accurate, whether it's coming from a reliable source. And most media out there today has some kind of bias. And it's important that we talk about all of these sorts of media with our students. I always say that TV and radio and some of those other media pretty much exist to provide advertisers with a place to sell things. And very often, media bows to the whims of advertisers. So that's kind of the goal of what we're going to talk about today is how to separate all that stuff out. So what is media literacy? And here you'll see an explanation that it's the ability to critically access, analyze, evaluate, and create media in various forms. And that gives our students and our learners the ability to understand the messages that they are looking at. And again, when we talk about media literacy, we're talking about television, radio, newspapers, social media, websites, and other digital platforms. And then finally, how to respond to what they see out there in the media. So here's a breakdown of some of the key components. The first one we talked about was access. You know, knowing how to find and use the media that's out there. Then analyze, to be able to understand various techniques used to convey messages to us. Things like language and visuals and how it's framed, how it's put. Then evaluate, assessing the credibility, the intent, the bias that's in that media content. Create, producing media responsibly. Are we seeing that? And then reflect, thinking critically, and critical thinking is so important to all the things we're going to talk about today. Thinking critically about how media influences beliefs, behaviors, and our whole society. And finally, how to act by using media to participate in our civic life, to make decisions about who to vote for and who to support, and to advocate for change when it's necessary.
All right.
So why is media important? Media literacy is important in today's digital age because we need to navigate misinformation. We need to recognize those persuasive tactics that media uses to bias us in what we've read. We want to use it to make informed decisions. And it's not just about consuming media, it's about engaging with it actively and ethically, and again, using critical thinking skills to apply it to our daily lives. Okay, Jamie.
Okay. So with that context that Marcia's given us, the definition of media literacy, the importance of media literacy. We'd like to know a little bit about you and how you relate to media literacy. I'm going to launch a poll, and I'll do that instead of talking. Here it goes. It should be 4 questions, and if I did it right, none of them is required. So if it doesn't relate to you, feel free to skip it, but we would love your participation. And you'll probably have to scroll to see all 4 questions.
Again, you should just be able to click on the answer or answers. Feel free to jump in because we can see how many of you are participating.
I think it's those open-ended questions at the end that
Yep.
are
You
people are
gotta
putting
think
lots
about
of thought
those.
into.
Good.
All right, we'll give it 30 more seconds. We're at 58% participation. Yay.
That's good. And you can be cryptic in your longer answers at the end.
All right, I'm going to end the poll. I apologize if I cut you off in the middle of your response. And I will share results. Okay, so it looks like a lot of us are using photos and images as the most popular media source. That's great. Videos and TV, news articles come next. Great. Our most popular answer for number 2 is sometimes. We include media literacy. And I think one of the important messages that Marcia and I want to convey today is that this isn't like, you don't need to consider just like one more thing, or it doesn't need to be a separate lesson. Like, these are things that we can include anytime we use media in our lessons. I don't know if I can see your answers or not for the sources you're using. That's too bad. Okay, thank you so much for participating in that poll. So we will transition next to offering you some strategies and resources that you can use to include media literacy in your lessons. Again, remember that these slides will be made available, and all the resources that we talk about today are linked within the slides. So I'll name the 3 strategies that we want to talk about today. The first one we're calling check your feelings. The second one is read laterally. And the third is recognize media bias. So this first one, check your feelings. This is the idea that any media that you are exposed to, we want to encourage people to pause, because all media is asking us to respond in some sort of way or to act. Maybe it's to make a purchase. Like Marcia was saying, we have to really recognize when we're seeing ads versus content. Maybe they want you to make a donation or to get out and vote. But sometimes the response is really just a, oh my gosh, did you see this? And you show your phone to somebody, or you share it on social media. And so before we do that, we want to encourage people to pause and answer these 2 questions. How is this trying to make you feel? Because we really respond when we have a strong emotion. Okay. Emotions aren't bad, but we need to be able to name them and choose whether or not to act on them. The second question is then, what questions do you have? And I would often phrase this to my students as we question everything. You should have a question all the time, whether it's because you don't understand or because you want to push back a little bit. So I'll show you some examples that I've used to model this in my classroom. Here's the first one. I got this a few years ago now in the mail, and I took a picture of it. It has my breakfast crumbs on it. Sorry for that. But it says, we hope the information below will encourage you to vote on Tuesday, November 4th. Okay, so that is the action they hope to evoke from me. And then I have this official voting record, which isn't too terribly official looking. My voter score, women voter scores like me, and my voting score is below average. So if I kind of go through these questions and I pause, what are the feelings? And maybe they're not my exact feelings, but I know the feelings they're trying to get me to have. They want me to feel shame. They want me to feel bad that my score is not as high as other people like me. And they want me to use that shame to make me act and to go out and vote. Okay. Then questions that I have, and mine are mostly pushback questions because I understand most of what's happening here. My pushback questions are, what makes these women voters like me? Okay. And what do these boxes mean? How did you get this score? So those are my questions. I'll give you another example. And I'll ask you to put your reactions in the chat. So here we have a picture. This might be like a meme that you see on social media. It says Starbucks uses thermally agitated dihydrogen monoxide in all its beverages. It is known to cause severe burns on contact with skin. So the first question, and I'll ask for responses in the chat, how is this trying to make you feel?
Lots of scared, lots of fear.
Yeah.
Frightened.
And so if we pick apart the way that it's trying to make us feel that, I would guess that it's this giant word here, agitated dihydrogen monoxide. Okay. And then like all capital letters, the word severe burns. Okay. Those are the techniques that they're using to make us feel that. Now, what questions do you have? How can you push back on this? What is that chemical? Yeah. Where did they get that information? Okay. What is that chemical? Why do they use it?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay. And so you could probably guess, but this chemical is water. Heated water. So we do have to question things before we share them. Otherwise, we can be scaring the rest of the population as well. I want to point out that this is a really good entry-level strategy if you work with English learners, because we can show pictures and then we can get people to name emotions and to ask questions. And the questions will change level based on our proficiency with the language. We might not always be able to get to the pushback types of questions, but we can get to the comprehension questions, and English learners can identify what they need to understand. What does that word mean? Okay. Here's one more. We'll practice all together. This was an ad I saw at a home improvement store. Now is a great time to buy lumber. The lumber market is significantly below last year's price level. Don't wait. How is it trying to make you feel? Go ahead and put those answers in the chat. Yeah, urgency, anxious, nervous, rushed. Great words. All right, and then the questions that you have for it. Do I need lumber all of a sudden? Yeah.
Great question.
Yeah. Yeah. I like these questions that are asking about, you know, the numeric value. What is the average price over several years? How do I know what the values are on that vertical axis? Great questions. Okay, so some of those questions started getting at the idea that there is a way to use data and graphs. And I think a lot of people want to show you a graph because it suddenly makes them more credible, right? Like here I have the numbers to back this up. But what you notice on that last one, and maybe even my voting score, is that there were no numbers. And so that is one way to manipulate a graph and to make it misleading. There are other ways that people can use data to mislead you, and this would probably be a valuable thing to teach learners. So with that in mind, we are embedding this video, how to spot a misleading graph, in our slides, but we are going to jump over it today in the interest of time because we have a lot of other great information for you. But that was our first strategy. So our first strategy is check your feelings. As you are checking feelings and moving into our second strategy, I think it's really important to discuss with learners this idea of misinformation and disinformation, because there's so much of it out there. And the distinction that we want to make is that misinformation is information that can potentially be confusing or misleading, but it's not necessarily intentional. The media source is not trying to deceive you. And then there's this continuum all the way over to disinformation, where it is false information and the source is intentionally trying to deceive you. And along this continuum, you'll see here on this chart are some vocabulary words, some terminology that will probably be worthwhile to teach learners. This one specifically, I found really valuable to teach my high school students. What does it mean to be satire or parody? Because if they come across a source and they know that it's satire, they know, oh, this, I shouldn't trust it, but its objective is to entertain, okay? And to point out how ridiculous things are. Anything else you wanted to add about this chart, Marcia?
Well, the only other thing I referenced it early on. I spent a number of years working in radio, and a few of those years were working in commercial radio. And that's where I really began to understand that advertisers are the folks who drive not just their advertising, but the content of much radio, which is one of the reasons why public radio is so refreshing. But advertisers can have great influence on the content of the media, and it's really important for our learners and our students to understand who's behind what we're seeing.
I got a message in the chat that my slides seem to be really zoomed in too far. Is everybody able to see the whole slide?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Great. Okay, so we will move on then to our second strategy. And I want to introduce it by telling you a little story. At Stanford University, there was a study done in 2017. A group of researchers from the Graduate School of Education conducted this study, and they made 3 groups of people: fact checkers, historians with PhDs, and current students at Stanford. And they asked each of those groups to study these two websites, the American Academy of Pediatricians and the American American Academy of Pediatrics and the American College of Pediatricians. And each group was asked to evaluate the trustworthiness of these two organizations. I'll let you all know that American Academy of Pediatrics is a legitimate and reputable organization. And the American College of Pediatricians has been labeled a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. So here's what happened in that study. This infographic is a little bit tricky to read, so I'll just orient you first. So here are those three groups: the fact checkers, the historians, and the students. The red represents the American Academy of Pediatrics, so people who decided that this one was a credible source. The orange is American College of Pediatricians, and so that is the percent of people who decided this was a credible source. And then this blue turquoise meant that the three groups, that they thought that those two sites were equally legitimate and trustworthy. Okay, so as you can see, all the fact checkers were able to determine that the American Academy of Pediatrics was the legitimate professional organization, but only 50% of historians and 20% of the Stanford undergraduates were able to identify the Academy as the legitimate professional organization. This is terrifying.
It is. And when you think of the caliber of students that attend Stanford, it's even more terrifying. You know, at the technical college, I could understand why my students may be moved by one thing or another, but this really is very scary information. So what happened? We have two ways of reading, of looking at our research. And we saw that the historians and the students were using vertical reading. And when we talk about vertical reading, it means moving, just as it said, vertically from side and across various pieces of information. Most of us do that. That's how we read. We read the vertical reading. The fact checkers were using lateral reading. And that meant that they were looking at everything kind of scaffolded together and getting a much broader and bigger picture of what that actually means. So they didn't just stay on the organization's website. They opened new browser tabs and looked at other sources and did comparisons from one to another. A really simple thing that I did with my students was gave them 5 or 6 different sources from a broad range of media and said, look at each one of those sources. Look at what their headlines are. What are they leading with? What's the top story? And if you see 2 or 3 or 4 of them doing that, you're probably getting whatever the headline of the day is in an appropriate way. And it's also an opportunity to use things like Google and Wikipedia. And you have to be careful with both of those. So let's take a look at a video that offers more real-world insight into lateral reading.
I can How are you taught to evaluate the credibility of online sources? Everyone knows that information on the web may be shallow, incomplete, inaccurate, or heavily biased, and many of us have been taught to explore the features of a website to assess its credibility. You may have learned to ask, is this site a .com or a .org? Does the site incorporate advertisements? Was it written by someone who appears to have appropriate expertise? Are there citations to supporting evidence or research? Is the information current? While sometimes useful, these questions can also misdirect you because they rely on superficial markers of credibility and authority. For example, some .org websites may be reliable and nonpartisan, while others may be partisan political action groups or even promoters of widely debunked conspiracy theories. On the other hand, some of the most authoritative news websites are .coms with advertisements, such as the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Relying on superficial markers to evaluate credibility can be problematic because most websites won't say, "I was designed by a biased political organization with an intent to manipulate you," or "I'm leaving out important information that might give you a more objective perspective on this issue," or "I was written by an uninformed person with no relevant expertise." So how do we improve our ability to evaluate websites when we know that some individuals and organizations may be working hard to misrepresent themselves and misinform us? By using a skill called lateral reading. Lateral reading is a simple concept used by professional fact-checkers and other savvy thinkers to judge the credibility of unfamiliar sources. While many of us judge a website by reading vertically, scrolling up and down to look for markers of credibility, or perhaps clicking on links within the site, fact-checkers jump outside the site, using new browser tabs to seek additional information about the site's credibility, reputation, funding sources, and potential biases. In other words, fact-checkers read laterally or horizontally across multiple web pages to get a big picture view of the site they're evaluating. They use Wikipedia, credible news sources, and other references on the web to understand what a source is and how credible it might be. They don't just take the source's word for it. For example, this news story on heavy metal music fan culture is on phys.org, a website that may be unfamiliar to us. But if I open up a new tab, I can search for information about phys.org and find out that it's a news aggregator that often republishes science news from across the web. I can also verify that the research discussed in the news story originated from University College London and PhD anthropology student Lindsay Bishop. By doing some homework on the source through lateral reading, we get a much better sense of what this source is and its level of credibility. We can also begin to think about its strengths and limitations from a more informed point of view. In this case, we might decide the information is reliable and a good starting point. But we might also want to look beyond this brief news story and find the original research or other more in-depth scholarly information. With lateral reading, you can move beyond the superficial aspects of website evaluation and develop a more nuanced and more complete perspective on the credibility of your sources.
All right, so I want to give us a chance to put these first two strategies together. So the first strategy, check your feelings, and the second strategy, read laterally. With this example here on the right. So sea otters are stealing surfboards at an alarming rate. Could you please put in the chat, how is this trying to make you feel, and what questions do you have?
This is stupid. Oh, good. Otters are pretty clever. True.
So a lot of us are amused, and just simply that feeling could cause us to share this information, right? To repost it on our social media, to tell somebody about it. The other thing, I think I chose this specific example of this because of its word choice. An alarming rate. Okay. So if I'm a surfer, maybe I should be scared about this. And, you know, a lot of people love otters and think they're so cute. But check out this picture that they chose to use. Like, this otter has some fangs. Like, I should maybe be a little bit more cautious when I go surfing, is the feeling that I think it's trying to evoke. And then, yeah, I've got a lot of questions too, like how is this happening? Why do I need to know this? And then I want to demo for you how to read laterally in a case like this. And you can definitely do this on your own right now, or you could come along with me. So the first thing when we read laterally is I could look this up. I could go right to this source and find this article, but that would be vertical reading. Like it's, so what that study, the Stanford study suggested to us is it's almost a waste of time to spend time in this Vice article trying to figure out if it's real or not. So we want to jump outside immediately. And so the first thing we'll do is we'll use Wikipedia to learn a little bit more about the source. And the source here is Vice or Vice News. And so using Wikipedia might be contradictory to what you've been telling students or what you've learned yourself, that Wikipedia can't always be trusted because it is crowdsourced. But it is a decent jumping off point, and it is a really good way to learn about a source without going to the source. So I'll show you that quickly with The Onion. The Onion is a satire news source. And so I want to point out that if you're looking up a source on Wikipedia, probably within the first 2 paragraphs, you're going to learn if it's to be a trustworthy source or not. So we do have here that it publishes satirical articles on international and local news. Notice that it doesn't define satire here. So that's why I think it's really important to explain to students what satire is. I could also put in here American College of Pediatricians, just to show you. Look at second paragraph, it has been listed as a hate group. So we don't have to spend a whole lot of time on Wikipedia to learn about a source and whether it's credible. So I'll just put in here Vice News. Okay. It is an alternative current affairs channel producing daily documentary essays and video through its website. Originally launched to mixed reception in 2013. It won a number of awards for its reporting, including 4 Peabody Awards and the inaugural Pulitzer Prize. Okay. So I'm starting to think, okay, this could be a credible source or a decent source to start with. The second thing I might want to find out is, are fact-checking sites reporting this as either true or false? And are there any other sources reporting this same site? I want to point out here before I do this that reading laterally requires some digital skills. And so we do not want to assume that students have these digital skills, and we really probably want to break them down and teach them. Using Wikipedia could be a skill in and of itself. Searching this, if I try to find other sources that are reporting the same thing and I put in this headline word for word, the only thing I'm going to get, or the first thing I'll get at least, is this article. And I don't want to find this article. I want to find other sources that are reporting it. So this skill of maybe pulling out keywords from this and using those keywords to search is something you'll probably want to teach learners. So I might, in a Google search, put sea otters stealing surfboards and see what I get. Another skill that you want to teach learners is to scroll. Okay, we don't always want the top or the first source that comes up. Ooh, look at ABC7 is using the word aggressive. And we have the New York Times reporting it. Here's that original article from Vice. NPR is reporting it. Smithsonian is reporting it. So lots of other sources are reporting it, which tells me that it's probably true, that it's probably happening. The other question that I asked in the other part of lateral reading is fact-checking site. So I could go to Snopes, which is one fact-checking site, snopes.com. And I could put in here, otters stealing surfboards. And the way Snopes works is it will show you the story and then it will tell you what the fact checkers have determined. So here it is saying it is true. The last part of reading laterally is you could do another search and use the word scholarly in your search to only get scholarly sources. This isn't a super scholarly subject, so we'll skip that step here, but that's a really good way to only get scholarly sources. It does point out the fact that you really need to know sources or be familiar with them and how credible they are as we're looking at that. I'm seeing the chat kind of be active here. Anything that I need to address? No, just people still amused by otters. Perfect.
I was trying to decide, should we? Yes, so just comments.
Okay.
They're good ones. They're very good ones.
Before I move on to the third media literacy strategy, I want to point out how I designed this practice activity as an instructor. I like to sort of reverse engineer my activities and go directly to Snopes to find either the false information, the fake news, or the real news that seems like too crazy to be true, like sea otters stealing surfboards. And then find that article and show that to my students. And then we take it through these reading laterally strategies.
And Jamie, I'll just note that it was added a comment. They also look for how many results are shown when doing research.
Yeah, yes, that's great too. Because if there are more and more sources corroborating it, that's a really good indication that it is actually real news.
Right. Or more and more saying, it's fake. So
Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
Keep those comments coming. They're great.
Our third strategy, as I pointed out, and as you may have noticed, it's really important to sort of have an understanding of sources and be familiar with them if we're going to determine if something is credible. So this last strategy is identifying media bias. So not all sources are equal. And in fact, many sources, most sources have some sort of political bias. To show students this, I create a headline sort. So I'm going to share that with you in just a minute and we'll do it together. But the gist of this headline sort is that you take a news event and you find, well, here I found 4 different headlines because every source will say it in a little bit of a different way. And so the sources that I pulled from for this headline source are NPR, Fox News, NBC, and Reuters. I will mention that this headline is from 2012, so it's pretty old, but I think sometimes the benefit of having a little distance from the news is a good thing, because if you start with this activity and it's about something that is a current event, we get too bogged down in the current event and not in the word choice for it. So here's the digital version of the headline sort. And I'm going to show you how to set it up, and then I will share it with you. So there are 3 columns here. We're going to put on the left positive word choice as the label for that column, neutral word choice in the middle, and then negative word choice on the right. And then we'll take these 4 headlines and we'll try to sort them. I'm going to share this link with you in the chat if you'd like to try it yourself.
And this is in Flippity, right, Jamie?
Yes, this is Flippity. I love this tool. It has so many different templates for creating free activities, online activities for students.
Some are already created for you and you can create your own. So yeah, it's a really fun resource.
All right, I'll give folks a minute to get into that activity if they'd like to try it themselves. So essentially in 2012, what happened is the jobs report came out. The jobs report is a way that we can sort of measure the health of our economy. All right, so I typically sort these headlines this way. The wrong way growth is a pretty good indication to me that that is negative word choice about this jobs report. Okay, the economy is not growing in the right way, it's the wrong way. Okay, and we got jobless here, and hiring remains slow. Neutral, I tend to choose 2 for neutral. Job growth steps up, but jobless rate rises. Okay, so we're reporting both sides of what happened in that job report. We got more jobs, but we also have more unemployment. This one as well, I tend to keep in the neutral. It's saying the same thing as this one at the top, but it's adding some numbers. So 163,000 jobs added in July. Unemployment rate rose to 8.3%. And then this is the one that I put in the positive word choice. And then I usually have some fun with that word revved, because not all my students understand it, but then I go vroom, vroom, vroom. US economy's job engine revved up in July. And notice that it doesn't even mention the unemployment rate. So it's only really reporting that first part, that the jobs, there were more jobs. Okay. Is there anybody that sorted this a different way or has any questions? All right, so we're not really talking about political bias just yet with this headline source. I'll take us all there in just a minute, but this is a great way to show that word choice is important, and sources use word choice, and when they do, they reveal their bias. And right now we're really only using the words positive, neutral, and negative to talk about that bias. But then there are great resources out there online to help you identify media bias in the political sense, so left-leaning and right-leaning. And I want to show you 2 of those resources so that you can use them with learners. The first one is AdFont. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, media bias chart. There is a free version of this source, but I want to warn you that it's going to invite you to upgrade frequently. So you can continue to use the free, but just know that that is the case. So I went to the interactive media bias chart, try to get rid of some of these distractions for you. And I want to point out that this chart has a vertical axis and a horizontal axis. And so it's rating media sources on the horizontal axis down here is on their political bias. So from neutral in the middle to left-leaning and right-leaning. What I love about this source is that it's also rating media on its value, the value and the quality of its content. So less reliable to more reliable. And then we have some definitions even here: original fact reporting, high effort, inaccurate, fabricated info. And then you can see here, go ahead, Marcia.
Oh, I was going to say, one of the ways I introduced this chart was just listed a bunch of these sources on the board and asked my students, what do you think? Are they left-leaning? Are they right-leaning? Are they neutral? And student bias came out by doing that. Then when they got to see the chart, it was like, oh my gosh, well, I never thought blah, blah, blah. So it's a really, really good chart. I know it's hard to see what's in there, but I think everything is pretty much covered.
I love that activity too, because it can be very kinesthetic if you have them like try to create their own chart first.
Yes.
Want to point out here, yes, it is very hard to see, and we'll zoom in just a minute. But the other thing I love about this chart is this green box here. Like, this is the sweet spot. So basically, if your source doesn't fall in this box, it's really not worth using. I'm going to remove some of the sources for the time being. just so that we can see this a little bit easier. And then I'm going to scroll in.
Mhm.
Okay, and so if you'll remember those headlines, the 4 headlines, one of the sources was Fox News. Right, and so I can see Fox News out here on the right and beneath the green box. Eeks. Another source was NPR. Let me know if you see it.
I think it's black.
There it is. It's right there. Okay, so within the green box, but a little bit left of center. There was NBC as well. So that is also left of center and a little bit lower in quality content. And then Reuters, which if I scroll in a little bit more, you'll see, or maybe you won't see, there it is.
Yep.
Reuters, little bit left of center, higher quality content than either NPR or NBC or Fox News. So that's how I would sort of help students navigate this source and to find those 4 sources. Or like Marcia said, start with like, where do they think they're going to end up first?
Mhm.
The second resource that you could use for identifying media bias is All Sides. All Sides needs to verify that I'm a human before. There we go. And so there's a lot to offer in All Sides, and I encourage you to check it out and explore, but I'm in the media bias and ratings tab. And if I scroll down, it will list so many news sources in alphabetical order. Okay, it will tell you the type of news. And then this column is the one that we're really interested in, the bias rating. So we don't get the graph where we're talking about the quality of content, but we do get the political bias. And you'd have to teach learners what these things mean. So we have 2 L's, meaning left leaning, but this one is extreme. We have the C for center, and then 2 R's, meaning right leaning, and the further right you get, the more extreme it gets as well. And so we have the All Sides bias rating for news as well. I'm going to share this one in the chat with you so that if you want to explore it, you can find NPR, Reuters, Fox, and NBC yourself.
And both of these sources were put together by nonpartisan organizations. So often someone will say, well, yeah, but that was just put together by the left, or that was just put together by the right. No, in both of these cases, they are as nonpartisan as one can be.
All right, so we're going to pause to practice again and kind of put this all together. And I'm going to ask you, I'll launch a poll in just a minute, and I'm going to ask you to determine which source ran which headline. And again, the headlines that I'm talking about are here in our headline sort. I often have to explain to students why this particular news event could be considered political before I have them do this. So again, this happened in 2012. Anybody know who the president was in 2012? Yes, it was Barack Obama. Okay. And often we blame the economy on the president. Whether they really have anything to do with it or not, how the economy is doing is the president's fault, or to the president's credit. So if we are positive in our word choice about how the economy is doing, and a Democrat is the president, then we're probably a left-leaning news source. If we are negative in how the economy is doing and the president is a Democrat and we're blaming him, then we are probably a right-leaning news source. Okay, so keep that in mind. as I launch this poll. It's definitely okay to be wrong.
Yeah.
This is how we learn.
Interesting answers. Very good.
All right, we'll give it 30 more seconds. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results with you all.
Good participation. Thank you.
Okay, so 163,000 jobs added. This was the headline that NPR was running that day. Wrong way growth, jobless jumps in July is the headline that Fox News was running. U.S. economy's job engine revved up in July was NBC's headline, and job growth steps up but jobless rates rise is Reuters. Thanks, everyone. So to drive that home, that strategy there, recognize media bias, is really going to help us then when we read laterally, because if we are trying to find other sources reporting the same news, we'll have a better understanding of the reliability of that source and its particular political bias and how they might choose to report that news event. So to review, we've presented you with 3 strategies that you can use with learners. The first one, check your feelings. That's really just a pause and think about, how is this trying to make you feel? What questions do you have for it? Read laterally. We're not spending too much time in the source to determine if it's credible. We're jumping outside the source to learn about what kind of source is that, and are other sources reporting the same thing? And then, are those other sources biased? Yes, they are, but in what way? Questions that you have. Yes, ethos, logos, and pathos is definitely a lesson that you can bring into this as well. And those are like the 3 persuasive techniques. So ethos is like the credibility of the source and the author. Logos is what those graphs were trying to do, right? They were trying to bring in data and numbers because we tend to trust those more.
Yeah, credibility.
Logos is like the content, the information, and then pathos is that feeling that's evoked. So those are great terms and concepts to bring into media literacy as well.
Jamie, I'll just bring in a comment that was in the chat about reading laterally, like you may want to check how many people have reported on this topic rather than a single report being discussed on multiple platforms.
Okay, yes.
Excellent point.
Want to point out that this slide will probably be helpful to you when you receive the presentation. So all of the resources that we mentioned, and then some more. So I did name some of the fact-checking sites here that could be useful. So you'll find all of those on this slide.